Explanation of the evidence at the Pentagon on 9/11, created by Wayne Coste, narrated by David Chandler. Okay, here's the table of contents, and this is for chapters 9 to 17. Chapter 3, Size of the Opening in the Pentagon. The hole too small error is widespread. Many Pentagon commentators ignore the 100-foot opening in the first floor and erroneously state the hole is too small. They make the claim but don't review the damage in detail. An even more egregious error is to claim the C-ring exit hole was the entrance hole. A popular YouTube video that we looked at in the previous chapter with nearly 5 million views claimed the C-ring exit hole was the entrance. The 16-foot hole misstatement continues propagating misinformation to the present. This presentation that I'm narrating now was created in 2017, and at that point, global research in an article by Terry Masson on the 16th anniversary of 9/11 uses the phrase, quote, "nor any hole in the facade into which the plane could have been swallowed up." Conscious Life News for the same anniversary had a single article about 9/11, which was about the Pentagon. They repeat Major General Albert Stubblebine's quote, "You can't fit a Boeing 757 into a hole that's only 16 feet wide." The purpose of this chapter is to illustrate the evidence supporting the following points. The Pentagon exterior wall had no reinforced concrete wall sections. It had limited structural resistance to the event. A continuous opening exists on the first floor of the Pentagon facade that is approximately 100 feet wide and extends from column 8 to column 18. Let's look at the cross-section of the wall and the blast-resistant windows. All components of the wall are clearly visible in the post-collapse photos we have. Limestone exterior sheathing, bricks, support columns, steel window frame supports, and blast-resistant windows. When the wall crumpled, it exposed the wall components. The outer surface of the Pentagon consisted of limestone facings. There's a layer of bricks behind the limestone between the window frames and the columns. You can see several examples of the steel window frames and the blast-resistant windows shown in many photographs with a green tinge. You can also see one of the limestone cornice pieces. You can see column 18 on the right, which as we pointed out in the pre-collapse pictures was leaning to the right. You can still see the leaning here in relation to the vertical yellow line. Here's another perspective showing the green blast-resistant windows, the steel window frames, a few of the limestone cornice pieces, and also notice the shattered stump of a tree that was in front of column 16. Here's a photograph of the steel reinforced window frames. They're not particularly significant in terms of the overall building structure, but they support the windows. Note the little window support fingers, the little steel plates that we'll see again later. At the bottom of the picture it says, quote, "structural steel running through all 5 floors strengthens the walls around the blast-resistant window units. A geotechnical mesh of Kevlar is stretched between the steel tubes to prevent fragments to become shrapnel in case of external explosion." The wall was created with blast-resistant windows. They are not blast-resistant walls. This is a quote from a Pentagon document. Quote, "under the renovation plan, the outer wall was reinforced with structural steel tubing to increase its lateral stability and provide support to new blast-resistant windows." Jumping down, quote, "new windows for the E-ring, the same size as their predecessors, but with glass 1.5 inches thick and weighing more than a ton apiece, were welded into special tubular steel frameworks, which we will be talking about later. On 9/11, many survived the blast." There are a number of videos that show the impacted wall crumbling down. Some speculate that explosives brought the floors down, but Bob Pugh says it sounded like a crunch. Conflicting claims about the size of the opening in the facade. Many claim the opening was only 18 feet, some say 10, 16, or 20. We've heard those numbers before. One person compared it to the size of a garage door. This is one of the most common photographs used to support an 18-foot opening. It is frequently asserted that this is the largest opening in the wall. By doing so, they have ignored the entire first floor damage, which extends for approximately 100 feet. In this picture, the first floor is obscured by the spray from the fire hoses. Some say it's only a 10-foot opening because column 14AA appears to be still intact on the second floor. But however large this hole is, it pales in comparison with the damage on the first floor. Here's an older analysis based on composite photographs that estimates a 96-foot opening on the first floor. It shows the 18-foot opening on the second floor. It shows the hanging columns, and it shows that for the 96-foot span, there are no remaining support columns. Because of all the smoke, there are no photographs that show the whole width of the first floor damage. Therefore, we have to look at information from a number of photographs to construct a composite analysis. Composite photos have been made of the Pentagon wall by several people. The accusation by some is they are photoshopped. A composite photo, by definition, is the merger of multiple images. Photoshopped may be an accurate term in a technical sense, but the real issue is whether they are neutral about the resulting information. The question is whether the composite photo accurately reflects reality or whether it misrepresents the information in the originals. The key assertions based on the composite photos are: a large opening exists on the first floor, the opening is up to 100 feet wide, and the large opening is contiguous. So here is how you would create a composite. You first take existing photos, cut, trim, adjust for perspective, then overlay. The top image shows the best view of the north end of the opening, but it's taken from the side, so it has to be adjusted to be able to use it in this kind of a composite image. The north end of the opening has no clear front-on view before the collapse. This is a side view, flattened to represent a front view. Note that some perspective effects can creep in. For instance, from the side perspective, the column to the right of column 9AA appears to be column 10AA, whereas it is actually column 9A, which is behind 9AA in depth. It is the side viewing angle of the original picture that makes it appear to be to the right. We will see the original photograph this came from later for comparison. Here's composite 2. The best evidence supports an opening of about 100 feet. This composite view shows the entire facade missing between columns 8 and 18. Column 9A appears to be part of this panorama, but actually it is deeper in the building. 9AA is still intact, barely, but it is strongly bowed. The only intervening columns in the 100-foot opening are columns 15, 16, and 17, but all of these are severed at the base and hanging, presumably from the rebar. Column 18 has been tilted, as we have seen, but it's apparently where the major damage ends on the first floor. Here's a post-collapse view showing the northernmost section of the first floor. This is the source photo for the composite view, showing columns 9AA with 9A behind it. Let's turn to the south end of the first floor opening. The south end of the opening terminates at column 18. Columns 15, 16, and 17 have remnants hanging. Claims have been made by some people that the columns are intact at the bottom, rising from the floor, and they're angled outward. This would mean they would be angled incorrectly for a momentum event from the outside. In fact, multiple views show that they are in fact hanging, so the assertion that they are leaning outward is not supported. Here's one photo that shows the fire burning in the background, showing through underneath columns 15, 16, and 17, which demonstrates they're attached at the top, not at the bottom. This also gives a good view of the shattered tree stump that was near column 16. Some people have thought the tree stump was part of a column, but it's not, as we will see in photos taken from different angles. Here is the iconic Jason Ingersoll photo that shows a lot of good detail. In particular, note the hanging columns. It's not even certain that these are columns. They are something hanging down in the positions of these columns, but they might be other material. Here's the same photograph with the columns labeled. Here we are zooming in. Note that columns 15 and 17 are quite small. It's not even clear that these are columns. Column 16 is quite a bit larger, which is a bit of a puzzle. It's Wayne's contention, Wayne, the author of this presentation, that column 16 was protected by the tree whose stump is shown here. The tree absorbed a lot of the energy, so column 16 was less severely damaged than the columns on either side. Here's another Jason Ingersoll photo that gives a good view from a different angle. Here we have zoomed in. Notice that columns 15, 16, and 17 still appear to be connected at the top from this angle. The top ends of the columns are where those columns should be. It is the bottom ends that are displaced to the left. Let's go back to the north end of the first floor opening. Here's a Will Morris photograph that shows the north end of the opening. We're going to see that columns 8 to 13 are missing. You can see column 9AA that's bent and barely visible in the smoke. Columns 10, 11, and 12 are clearly missing, while the fire shows through from behind. Column 13 is strongly obscured by the smoke. Also take a look at the areas under the windows between columns 11 and 12 and between columns 12 and 13. You can see that there is no floor slab or beam across the front, so something has impacted or done a lot of damage to this area. As we will see later, the wing would have been entirely under the second floor slab at this point, so that couldn't have done the damage. The only thing that would have been sticking up to do the damage there would have been the tail section, and that could have been because the plane may have undergone some rotation, which we will talk about later. Here's another view of the north end opening after the roof collapse. Zooming in, this view was taken approximately perpendicular. You can barely see column 9AA in the smoke. You can also see some of the tree branches that were present. Here's a much better view of column 9AA. You can see column 9A in the background and the steel window support tube. You can see the tabs that supported the window rotated about 90 degrees. Note here there are no surviving columns to the right of column 9AA. The sloped material from the fallen roof is visible on the right and is behind the surviving part of the floor slab, but there is nothing blocking the view in the foreground. On the right, you get a clear, up-close view of column 9AA, connected at the top and bottom but bowed in the middle. A steel window support is shown to the right in the picture on the right. You can see the stubs where they cut off the fingers that attach to the window frames. Let's take a closer look at the hanging remnants of column 16. We have seen this picture before. It shows columns 15, 16, and 17 hanging from the second floor slab. As we mentioned before, some people have argued that these columns are attached at the bottom and leaning outward at the top, perhaps caused by a bomb blast from inside the Pentagon. But notice, if we extrapolate the three columns to where they would intersect the ground level, they would have risen from points under the windows. The columns, however, are between the windows, so the hypothesis that they were attached at the bottom is not viable. Here we see column 16 with a spool in the foreground. Here we see it from a different perspective, since the foreground spool is no longer in alignment. Notice that in both pictures, the top of column 16 appears to be attached to the second floor slab, right where column 16 would be expected. So this is not a perspective effect. The top of the column has not shifted. Here we have a view from the far left-hand side taken from some video footage. You can see that column 16 still appears attached at the correct spot, and also that from this angle it's apparent the bottom of column 16 is pushed not only to the north, parallel to the wall, but also inward. Here's another view from the left showing column 16 hanging from the second floor slab and dangling inward into the building. And here's another confirming view. Here for comparison are pictures of column 16 from left, center, and right. They all show column 16 attached to the same point on the second floor slab. Column 16 is clearly hanging. Here the bottom end of column 16 seems to align with something vertical, leading some to continue to assert that it's attached at the bottom. but when seen from other angles for comparison, the vertical segment is clearly a shattered tree stump. Note in this picture that there is a vertical spool in front of the tree stump. In the next view, you'll see the spool tipped over because of the collapse of the roof. In this post-collapse image, you can see the splintered tree stump with the horizontal spool in front of it that was tipped over. Here you can see the splintered tree stump more clearly from a different angle. Let's look at the hole in the second floor facade. The clean opening in the second floor, the 18-foot opening, appears to be an entire sheet of wall material that fell out. This would have contained 2 reinforced windows, which were near the center of impact. Since the windows were attached to a steel framework attached to the wall, it is reasonable that the entire wall unit would come out together, leaving the clean break. One of the things that can help explain the damage in this area centered on column 14 is the tree that was present in front of column 16. Only the stump was left, but the whole trunk would have been thrown against the building and created additional local damage. In Chapter 4, we will look at the design, construction, and destruction of the E-ring wall, the outer wall of the Pentagon.